Welcome back to the Fairest Love Podcast. Today on the show, we're very fortunate to have author Dia Boyle to talk about her newest book, The Thoughtful Home. Dia, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We're really excited to hear about this book that you just wrote, but can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write The Thoughtful Home?
I've always loved the home. I always wanted to make a home, and I guess I'm a very thoughtful. I'm kind of an intellectual person, so I've always thought about what I was doing, why I was doing what I was doing. But in maybe the last 15 years, I started to work with my husband's a professor, an undergraduate professor, and I've started to work a lot more with the young women and to some extent the young men who come through his program. We travel with them to Rome. I spend a semester every few years in Rome living with them. And so I get to know them very well. And in doing all that, I guess I kind of naturally fell into the role of mentoring. And I found, to my surprise, that the things that I just assumed about the home and family life, they had not necessarily experienced, even though many of them came from very strong homes. But that I realized that the cultural template of the home, which had existed when I was a child, and then when I was very early in making a home, that template doesn't really exist anymore. Those, just to use the example of a family meal, the young women I'm dealing with now and in the past 10 or 15 years, so millennials and Gen Z, they didn't necessarily grow up with a family meal. So not only if they realize this is an important part of the home, the family life, it's not just that it's a challenge and it's hard, which I will agree with, but they didn't have the example of it. So that they don't have the muscle memory for it. That's just one example. Mm-hmm. So I realized I have something to give here. And I thought about it a lot. I started to speak and teach about the home. And I would consistently get the comment, you should write a book. So eventually I wrote a book. So that's the genesis of it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that it's not taught anymore. And so that's kind of where it came from, that inspiration to write this book and people desiring it. I think that's very beautiful that people desire it. So how would you define a thoughtful home, and why is it important for people to create that atmosphere or that thoughtfulness within the home?
So the home is, this isn't exclusively true, but for the most part, families live in homes. And homes are for families. And the family is unique because we belong to a family not because of what we do, but because of who and what we are. If you belong to a corporation, a workplace, a profession, it's because you are useful to them, right? You have a role in those. It's because of what you do. But in the family, it's you belong because you're the mother or the child or the father or the grandmother. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. You are just as much a part. You belong to that family just as much when you're doing good or when you're not doing good, right? So it is the perfect place for human beings to receive the care that they need to flourish as human beings, not necessarily to flourish as workers. I mean, it will all contribute to that, but there are many places where we receive care, but not as human beings. And like I mentioned, that cultural template that seems to be missing. And it's not just that the template is missing. I mean, when I say template, what I mean is, for example, there used to be the dinner hour. When I was a kid, you would never call someone during the dinner hour. I mean, that's almost a meaningless concept now, right? People call anytime, in part because of the nature of our communication, right? We can call or text or email at any time of the day. But also because when would the dinner hour be? You know, maybe in my mind, there still is a dinner hour, but I don't think that most people have that, you know, or younger people have that sense of like, there's a time when you just wouldn't do that. So that's what I mean by cultural template. But it's not just that there's not a cultural template, but that the culture itself acts against the human good in so many ways. And that's not, again, not to damn the culture. It's just that the culture is very formed by a consumer mentality. We are we're profit driven. We are comfort driven. We're efficiency driven. And so, the things that just sort of keep rolling in the culture, we have to act against if we're going to give the care that people need in order to flourish as human beings. So therefore, we have to be thoughtful. And we have to think about what we're doing. We have to be deliberate and intentional about what we're doing in our homes, because we can't, if we just go with the flow, whether that flow is, from the consumer culture, whether that flow is from the influencers that we are following in social media, we aren't going to be doing the right things for our family, and we won't be giving them what they need. And we ourselves, the ones who are delivering that care and also receiving care, we will sense that we are not doing what needs to be done, which gives us a ton of anxiety. So stepping back and thinking through what we're doing, making decisions thoughtfully, is very important to making a home that actually serves the purpose of the home. One of the things I say in the book, or the byline of the book, whatever, is I talk about what is a home and what is it for, and that question that takes being thoughtful, right? We have to think about, what is it for? What am I trying to do here? What am I trying to accomplish? It's not just an aesthetic and a list of tasks, right? Which is the way a lot of us look at, the work of the home. It's like, what's it going to look like? How am I going to, decorate? And also, what are the tasks that have to be done? But we need to step back before we figure that out. We have to think, well, what's it for? What am I trying to do here?
Yeah, that's a great
thought.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, I love that you touched on culture. I think that's very important, especially for my generation too, where it's, contact whoever you want, whenever you want. And yeah, and just that question of what is the home for? I think that's very important to reflect on it. So when you spoke about intentionality and being intentional in the home and being thoughtful and intentional in the home, what does that look like, let's say, when parents are trying to build that home environment? What does intentionality look like? Where do they begin?
Well, that's a great question. I think the home should foster among many other things, but two realities that we can really protect and encourage in the home, where we don't have a lot of power outside the home to do this. So those two things are contact with reality, contact with actual reality, as opposed to virtual reality. Contact with reality and human contact. So contact with reality is important because, we can see, like, our culture, again, it pushes us to the virtual all the time. We used to play baseball, then we watched it on TV, and now we do fantasy teams, which don't really even, they aren't real teams even. We're not watching the game anymore. That's true all across the board, for good or for ill. I love my smartphone. I have to say that,
Yeah.
But reality, material reality, is how human beings come to know, right? Babies learn by seeing and touching and tasting. They're always putting things in their mouth, and hearing and feeling, right? Or that was touching, whatever I missed, smelling. That's how we come to know. And if we are less and less in contact with material reality, because we're seeing everything on the screen, we're experiencing everything on the screen, we do lose our comfort level with material reality. It becomes uncomfortable to be in contact with reality, and that affects our knowledge. We start to say, how do we really know anything? How do I really know whether I'm boy or a girl. In the old days, it was pretty obvious whether we were boys or girls, right? But if you lose contact with material reality and you no longer trust that, or just you're not firmly based on it, then it causes a lot of problems. And it doesn't just cause those kind of huge problems. It's also, if we go into our kitchen and there's crumbs on the counter and there's some dishes in the sink, well, if we're not comfortable with material reality, we can just say, I'm going to look on Instagram, or I'm going to look at House, or I'm going to look at Pinterest where everything's clean. And instead of saying, okay, I got to wipe off these counters, I got to do these dishes, we become more and more, it's so easy to escape material reality. So I think that's one thing we want to focus on in the home is contact with reality. And that means having, things in our home, having experiences in our home of reality. We can control it here, whereas we can't control it in the workplace or in the schools. Our kids, you send them to a great school and they still are on laptops a lot. You homeschool them, they're still on laptops a lot once they get a little, to a certain age. And that's just reality right now, but it's not material reality. In the home, we can make sure that there's a fire in the fireplace. There's books and chairs and games that we actually play with our hands and our eyes and our head. The other thing is human contact. And we know how terrible, we've always known that people need human contact, that, solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments that we can offer. And children growing up in Soviet era orphanages who didn't have human contact, they were damaged for life. Human contact is key. And then we saw, of course, with COVID, how much we suffered from a lack of human contact, how hard that was on human beings. And so in our homes, we can provide and ensure like a lot of human contact. Mm-hmm. And that's not a given, right? If we are all in our home, let's say we've got a family of 5. Everyone has his own room and has a door and has all their screens in their room. It's very easy to be in that home with no human contact or very minimal human contact. And again, when we're not in human contact regularly and frequently, we lose comfort level with human contact, right? We don't want to look people in the eyes. We don't want to break up with our boyfriend in person, right? We want to do it by text. We aren't, a lot of the just normal human functions, just because we're out of practice or we don't have that practice. And it's not just, eye contact. It's things like we don't know how to negotiate differences. We don't know how to share because we didn't grow up sharing. So a home, the best way, I think, to make sure that there's human contact is, well, first of all, to control the screens, of course, but also not to assume that bigger and more is better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's simple to, not to like add an addition onto your house, not to knock down a wall in your kitchen to make their kitchen bigger. That's a simple thing to do, but it's a hard thing to do, right? Because we want that bigger kitchen. We don't want to be all bunched up in one place. We like space. We like individuality. We like privacy. We like having our own room and closing the door. That's hard to overcome, but it's quite simple. Most of us, can manage that. Even just like the bathroom, right? How many bathrooms do we need in a house? If you just have one bathroom, and I will just tell you, I have 3. So I'm not speaking like I'm some kind of, minimalist. But if you have one bathroom, first of all, there's a lot of human contact, right? You're not brushing your teeth by yourself. You got 3 kids, they're going to be brushing their teeth at the same time. They're going to be knocking elbows and they're going to be getting in each other's way and learning how to cope with that, how to deal with that, how to giggle about that instead of getting angry. Or if you get angry, how to get over being angry, how to help the other one, to reach the toothpaste for the little one. But also, you've got one bathroom, you're going to be learning how to share, learning how to think of the consequences of your action. If you take an hour-long shower, somebody is going to be doing the potty dance in the hallway outside, right? Or banging on the door saying, let me in. So all those little things that we just think of as, it would be so much easier, it would solve all my problems if we had 2 bathrooms or 3 bathrooms or 4 bathrooms. I'd never have to see my kids mess if the kids had their own bathroom, or if the girls had their own bathroom, the boys had their own bathroom. But it feels like it would make everything easier, and in some ways it would make it easier, but it wouldn't be necessarily good for the thoughtful care of the family. Those things that can only be provided really in the home.
I come from a big family, and so when people hear how many kids are in the family, I have 6 siblings. They, it's a shock for some people, especially when I went to high school and when kids came from smaller families. But yeah, it's like we learn a lot in that big family, especially, my parents were very conscientious of our finances and all that stuff. So like we weren't, living on with outside of our means or anything like that. But it taught us a lot about that. And those skills are life skills. They're not just, family skills. They're actually teaching you how to be better, kind of citizens in a society.
Exactly.
I love how you talked about it not being easy necessarily to be like in a smaller space or, but the rewards, even though it's harder, the rewards are deeper and more profound. I'm curious what your thoughts are, not necessarily to make it easier, but to help parents to start, maybe finding things that they can start to change or start to do differently that will help them in, creating this thoughtful environment.
Yeah, that's great. I think there are a few, time-tested practices in the home, which have faded a lot for all kinds of reasons, but they're not gone. They're still in so they're still in our memory. And maybe it's the way we grew up and maybe it's not. Depends on our era and our family background. I think the family meal, again, simple, not easy, but the family meal doesn't have to be, so when I say the family meal, I mean the regular frequent meal, everybody together or almost everybody together. It doesn't have to be full attendance every single time. That is something that was actually the first thing I really came to realize that just wasn't happening. And that was hard for me to imagine because I couldn't really imagine, how do these people eat? How do these kids eat if they're not having a family meal? There's a lot of answers to that question. They weren't starving to death. So that's something that, again, it's simple, not easy, but it's also one of my favorite maxims is perfection is the enemy of the good. So when we say, okay, I'm going to start having a regular family meal, and maybe the practice has been that really hasn't been part of your life, you're not going to go to 7 nights a week. Maybe you're going to go to 2 nights a week. And the studies show 2 nights a week is really effective and positive. It's correlated with lots of positive outcomes in the family. I would say start with 2 and go to 3 and go to 4. They'll move in the direction of more is better, but you don't have to start with, if you start with 7 nights a week, you're going to fail if you really are going from 0. And then another thing is breakfast. Breakfast is such a simple meal. It can be such a simple meal, right? It can be cold cereal. And it takes 10 minutes. So it doesn't take your whole evening like the way dinner kind of does, which is glorious. That's one of the reasons dinner is so important. But breakfast, 10 minutes, and then you're out, in the carpool, or you're out the door to work or wherever you're headed. Or you're heading off to, the schoolroom, where you do homeschooling, if that's your jam. That's a pretty simple thing to do. But it does mean synchronizing schedules. It means everybody has to compromise on when they want to eat, and what they want to eat or whatever. That's just, the meal is we've always eaten together until pretty recently, just the last few decades. We've always eaten together. And that provides everything that I talked about. Contact with reality and human contact is just glorious in the meal. And even if it's just a 10-minute breakfast of cold cereal, you are dealing with the cereal, the bowls, passing things, making sure there's enough milk for everybody, all those things. And you're, of course, around a table with nothing to do but eat. And so you can talk, or you can at least see what the mood is of everybody at the table. Other things are the synchronization of the schedule. So by which I mean when you get up, when you go to bed, what you do, like I would say how you treat Sunday. So the synchronization of the week as well as the day. If you eat meals together, even just a few times a week, that helps to synchronize the time. And of course, I'm not saying everyone needs to get up at the same time and go to bed at the same time. But if there's order there, so that I was just talking to somebody who was saying she has kids going from college down to kindergarten. And she said, the little ones go to bed at a certain time. And she said, and then the older kids who are still around, that's when they come alive. And that's when they have all the questions, because they know mom and dad are available at that time, because the little kids are in bed. So that synchronization, that the fact that those big kids can count on, by 8 o'clock or 7:30 or 8:30, whatever time, the little ones are in bed, then they know I can wait until then. I can wait until then to ask for, to talk about something deep and profound, or just get these papers signed for school. That predictability, that reliability of the schedule is something that, again, simple, not necessarily easy, but I think it does become easy. The more you predictability really helps things to be easy for everybody. So, when you say little things or simple things that parents can do, that's a huge resolution to make, New Year's resolution or whatever, but it doesn't have to be as huge as that sounds. You can break it down and say, what little thing can we do to more synchronize our schedule, or to more, to foster more family meals? And I do think those are two. There's a reason that we have always eaten meals together. It's because it's solved some kind of problem that's human. It's a problem of human nature. It's not a problem of American 21st century. It's a problem. It's an eternal problem, not eternal maybe, but, for all of human history, we've had these problems, and these have been the solutions, and only because of the enormous wealth of our culture now, and the whole, the virtual reality that is so important to our culture and useful for so many things, but also it's new. This is not something that we had to deal with 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. Or at least if we had to deal with it, it was very minimal. It wasn't going to, change the way we think about reality, the way we deal with human beings.
Right. And along with these, these things obviously would probably encourage more peace and more joy in the home. Is there anything else that you would say that could encourage the peace and joy in a home environment outside of those two things? That you've noticed along your experience?
I heard something just yesterday which articulated really beautifully, and I'm looking for the piece of paper. Oh yeah, it is. I heard something yesterday that articulated really beautifully something that I'm saying in the book, and that I've been thinking for a long time. But this psychiatrist said that at times when you're together, so in the context of the home, when you're together with your family, so for most of us, that's late afternoon, evening. That's when you're all together, maybe a little bit early in the morning. Think about what you're doing, the activities you choose. And this would be, especially for parents, right? Choose parents and spouses. It's not just parent to child, but husband to wife. Choose activities which communicate that you are available for their attention, but don't demand their attention. So I'll just say that one more time. Choose activities which communicate you are available for their attention, but not demanding of it. So his suggestion was, what he was saying is, if you are in your home office and you're working on your computer, you are not communicating that you are available for their attention. Mm-hmm. If you're sitting in the family room reading the newspaper or reading, a book, who reads the newspaper now, but you are communicating that you're available, right? It's not like, oh, don't bother mom right now. She'll bite your head off. Or if you're sitting there with your glass of wine or whatever, you're available for their attention. I think that's something to keep in mind. Like when we think about how do I schedule my day? When do I so a lot of the work of the home is perfect for this, right? If I'm washing the dishes, I am available for attention, but I don't demand it. The family meal is the same way, right? We're sitting around the table, available for attention, available, if you have something you want to talk about, feel free, but we don't demand it. You can just sit there in silence and eat your food. That's, I think, one of the reasons that it works so well to build up family culture and to form us is that it's not like family game night. And again, nothing wrong. Family game night, great thing, great. I do not mean to discourage family game night, but family game night demands their attention, right? They have to be there. They have to show up and be there. And that's wonderful, but you can't do too much of that or else, human freedom, we start to bristle. It's like, go, not again. We have to go do family game night or go to the family meeting. But dinner, no one objects to going to dinner, right? Because it's food and no one's demanding anything of them, especially if we really think about how we're going to conduct the family table. You're from a big family, so you have more experience of that probably than, my family wasn't so small. I had four. There were four of us kids, and we raised three kids. So we didn't have that, big chaotic family life. But, I'm sure that all of those, whenever I hear about like a family meeting, I always think my kids would just roll their eyes. Another family meeting, but nobody rolls their eyes when it's time for dinner, and dinner is a family meeting. It's just one that doesn't demand their attention in the same way.
I love that. That's awesome. And just one last question before we discuss your book and where they can find it. What's one simple change that listeners can make today that creates a more thoughtful and joyful home? One, you had mentioned, scheduling and lining those things up. But if there's anything, even just one person in the family could do to make their own home a more thoughtful, more joyful home.
I would say find a way that keeps you in the home a little more. So to use the home as a place to be, we often go somewhere else to meet people, for meetings. That doesn't have to be the case. We can have those when we're meeting a friend. That friend can come over. We're meeting for coffee. Instead of meeting at Starbucks, think about, come over to my house. You don't have to clean. If you can make coffee, that's great. Or, a glass of water. That's a way of keeping, you said small. For some people, that's very big, I know, to open the door to others. But maybe that's small, look at that as small. Don't look at it as big. I know a lot of what I'm saying seems very global, but the idea of being thoughtful is to say, in my life, what little things can I do? What little things do I like to do? Because if we like to do it, we're more likely to do it, right? So if you love to garden, or if you love to knit, or if you love to, run, those things, you can look at them and say, instead of wishing that I just had all the time in the world so I could do these things, realize when I'm gardening, I'm available for attention. My children are going to learn about reality, and do that little thing that you love to do, and don't feel bad about it. Or, I love to knit. Well, knitting, that's another great way to, be in contact with reality. Children watch what you do. They want to imitate it. They want to play with the yarn. They see starting with, nothing and going to something. So I guess I'm saying, think about your life and your family, your kids, your husband. What do they like? Your wife, what does she like? And think about the things that you do in terms of the home, in terms of how is this affecting the others? How is this making the home a place of more human contact rather than less, more contact with reality rather than less? If you love beauty, then go for it. Seek beauty, foster beauty. If you love cooking, foster, enjoy that, because all those things but they're very personal. I don't want to tell people, and I didn't in the book, I don't want to tell people, here are 80 best practices for the home, because I think we're so different. We're all so different. And part of the joy of making a home is that it's personal, that it's my home, my family's home, and it's not going to be the same as our next door neighbor's home. Even if she's like the best Christian that we know, that doesn't mean that the way she makes her home is, or her kids are the most successful kids in the world. That doesn't mean that her home will be, her practices will be the practices that will foster. So, you see, like, I got walls and my mother says we insulate with books.
I've
You
been
should see every room
admiring
in
this
the
whole
house.
podcast.
But not everybody wants to insulate with books, right? And you don't need walls of books to have a good home, right? And you don't need beautiful, decor to have a thoughtful, good home. But some people do need that, right? We need those books to have a thoughtful home. So we figure out what that means, Anyway.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. No, I love it. What you've given in this podcast is practical in the sense that everyone can relate to it. Bringing reality to your home, connection. Those things are super important for family life and for just even if you don't have, a husband or kids or anything like that, you can still bring that thoughtfulness and that connection to your home and the reality to your home.
That's a beautiful point that you made. Even if you don't have a husband and children, a wife and children, everyone needs a home. And so if you live alone, or you live with roommates, or you live in your parents' house, you still should recognize about yourself that you need a home. You need a place that privileges human contact, that privileges contact with reality. And so sometimes it takes more thoughtfulness. How am I going to I live alone. How am I going to make this a place of human contact? Right? So that might mean a lot more hospitality if possible. Well, I'm not really a hostess. I don't know well, let's do cocktails, or let's do potlucks or whatever, because I need human contact, and I need to create a home that fosters that. I have a son that's single, lives alone. And I watch him making his little nice apartment, making it a place that fosters human contact. And it makes me really not just proud, but it relieves my mother's heart, right? He has people over. He has figured out ways to do that. And he has a home that's full of interesting, reality. There's cool stuff. He's an entomologist. And so there was a time when I visited him and there were crickets in the guest room, like he was keeping alive for some experiment that he was doing. I don't know, some research he was doing. That's a little more reality than I needed in the guest room. but that's contact with reality, right? There's crickets chirping in the next room. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We would love to hear about where we can find your book, if there's any other resources that you have or website that you'd like to share with our audience, just so that they can embrace this, thoughtfulness in their own homes.
Thanks for asking and giving me that opportunity. The publisher of the book is Scepter Publishing. So you can go to the Scepter Publishing website and order it there. I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah.
But it's available on Amazon as well. If you just, the Thoughtful Home, and you might want to Google my name with it, because Dia Boyle, because there is another book out there with the same name that's about, I don't know, decorating on a budget or something like that. And then I have a website that is very simple, www.diaboyle.com. So DIABOYLE.com. And that you can order it there. I mean, it has links to where you can order it. But it's available in bookstores. Some bookstores are carrying it, and it's doing well. So
awesome. And also, just to know, I looked on your website. You have kind of questions that walk through the Thoughtful Home book, which I thought was really excellent. If you wanted to have a book club with, in your little communities or groups or anything like that, I thought that was a really cool thing that you also had on your website.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, I do think it's a book that will be really enjoyed by groups of women. Or, I don't want to label it just for women, but I think that's going to be a lot of its audience. That to get together and talk about. And I've had people already say, I'm buying this for all my daughters for Christmas and we're going to have a book club, that's exciting to me. And so I put questions on keyed to each chapter just to get conversations started. They're not study questions. They're just, if you're not used to a book club format or whatever, you don't know what to say, these are questions you could start with. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dia, for being on our show and sharing this wonderful work that you have out.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mary Grace.